Hi guys, I look like a boy, but welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing a video on how to read 1-2 patterns. A lot of people were requesting this because they just wanted to read their own patterns, and a lot of bracelets you guys wanted me to show how to make, but the patterns for them were just way too long and I just didn't want to make a whole video on them. So let's just get right into the video. So this is what the 1-2 patterns look like. They might be a bit intimidating, but up top, this bar here is what the bracelet will look like, and then these are all your strings and your knots that you're doing. These numbers on the side that got cut off are the number of rows you're doing. So this tells you this is the first row, this is the second row, third row, etc. Each letter corresponds to a color, so A is black, B is orange, C yellow, D blue, E is red, and it tells you what order they go in and how many strings of each color you need. So this one tells you that you need 2 strings of each color, but this part's kind of confusing, but every bracelet you do, if it calls for 2 strings, you're actually going to cut 1 string at a wingspan's length and fold it in half to get 2. So take however many strings of each color you need and then just divide it by 2. So we need 2 strings of black, so I'm just going to divide that by 2, so we need 1 long string of black folded in half to get 2. Does that make sense? That makes sense. Okay. This also tells you how many strings are in your bracelet. You have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 strings in total. You'll cut your 5 strings at a wingspan's length. Since we need 2 of each color, I'm cutting 1 super long string and then folding it in half to get 2 of each color. And I'm just using the same exact color so it's not confusing, but you can obviously do different colors in the pattern. Just pick a color to be A and B and C and then just set them up that way. So I have my bracelet taped down, ready to go, and I have my pattern here. So this tells you how to set up your strings. So I'm gonna go ahead and set up my strings just like how the pattern tells me to. Okay, so I have my strings set up, A, B, C, D, E, A, B, C, D, E. As you can see, A, B, C, D, E, A, B, C, D, E, and it tells you what order. Okay, we read these patterns from left to right like you read a book, okay? So if the arrow is pointing right, which is the way that we read, then it's a forward knot. If it's pointing left, backwards, then it's a backwards knot. If it starts going forward and then goes backward, it's a forward backward knot. If it starts going backward and then goes forward, it's a backward forward knot. So just look at the arrows like the way that you read a book. We read left to right. If the arrow's going from left to right, it's a forward. If it's going from right to left, it's a backward. So this first knot is going to be a forward backward knot because the arrow starts by going left to right, which is the way we read, which is a forward knot, and then it goes backward, which is right to left, which is the backwards way we read, so it's a forward backward knot. And I've said before, but these bracelets work in pairs, so you can see which strings need to be paired up for this. We can go ahead and pair up our strings. So we have the black and the orange one paired, and then the yellow and the blue one paired, and then the 2 reds, and then the rest. So like I already said, the first knot is a forward backward. We're gonna first do a forward knot, and then we're gonna do a backward knot. And the awesome thing about this as well is it tells you what color your knot will be. So these circles with the arrows in it, those circles will tell you the color of your knot. This circle is black, so that means the knot should be black, and our knot is black. It also tells you where your strings will end up. The black will stay on this side, and the orange will now be on this side. Now we're gonna go over to our second knot, which is again a forward backward knot. So taking this pair, I'm gonna do a forward backward knot. For our next pair, this says to do a backward knot because it's pointing from right to left, but they're the same color, so you can really do any knot you want. Now moving on to our next pair here, it's going to be a backward forward knot because the arrow starts to go from right to left, but then it turns to go from left to right, so backward forward. All right, and then our final pair up here is going to be this last one here, which is again another backward forward knot. So now that we've done an entire row of knots, it's time to move on to the second row. So we just did the first row here. So now we're gonna go down to the second row and do this row. So if you remember doing this arrowhead bracelet, you remember that we leave our outer strings out, and that is what this is right here. This black string gets left out, and then we go to this pair. We repair all of our strings. These outer strings get left out. So the black ones don't get included. I'm gonna repair all of my strings. So we have our black strings left out, just like in row 2, and then we have all of our strings repaired. So this first knot tells you to do a backward knot because the arrow is going from right to left. So I'm going to do a backward knot. We just did this knot, now we're going to do this one. We have another backward knot because the arrow is going from right to left. We just did this knot, now we're going to move on to our third pair, which is going to be a forward knot because the arrow is going from left to right. We just did this knot, now we're going to go to our final knot, which is another forward knot because the arrow is going from left to right. And there's our second row of knots complete. We just did row 2, now we're going to move on to row 3. So now for row 3, you can see that our black string is now being used in a pair. So our black strings are now going to come back into the bracelet, and I'm going to repair all of my strings again. Our first knot is a backward forward knot because the arrow starts going from right to left and then it turns going from left to right. So it's a backward forward. Now moving on to our second knot in the row is another backward forward knot. Alright, so for our next pair we have the same color here. This one says to do a forward knot, but you can really do whatever kind of knot you want since they're the same color. Alright, so we just did 3 out of our 5 pairs, and now we're going to move on to our fourth pair, which is a forward backward knot. The arrow starts going from left to right, then it turns to go from right to left, so it's a forward backward. Alright, and then for our final pair, we have this knot right here, which is another forward backward knot. Alright, so we just did the third row of strings. Now we're going to move on to our fourth row down here, which you can see this black string is getting left out of all the knots and the pairs. So we're going to leave out these outer 2 strings here, and I'm going to repair all of my strings. This first knot is a forward knot because the arrow is going from left to right. Our second knot is another forward knot. Third knot is going to be a backward knot. And our fourth and final knot is going to be another backward knot because the arrow is going from right to left. So we just did row 4, now we're going to move on to row 5. You can like cross the rows out when you do them, or take like a paper and like cover it up or something, if that helps you. But yeah, we're moving on to row 5, which is this row right here. And looks like we have the outer black strings now back into all of our pairs. So I'm going to go ahead and bring them back in and make sure that we repair all of our strings. It looks like our first 2 pairs are going to be forward knots because these 2 arrows are going from left to right, so they're forward knots. This middle pair here, they're the same color, so you can do whatever knot you want. Moving on to our last 2 pairs. These are both backward knots because the arrow is going from right to left, so I'm going to just do 2 backward knots on these last 2 pairs. So we just did our 5th row here, number 5, so now we're going to move on to our final row, which is the 6th row down here, and it looks like our outer strings are getting left out, and this time they're orange instead of being black. So I'm going to take my outer strings, leave them out, and then repair my strings. So our first knot here is going to be a forward knot because the arrow is going from left to right, and the second knot is also a forward knot because the arrow is going from left to right. So I'm going to just do 2 forward knots. And then our final 2 knots are 2 backward knots because the arrows are going from right to left. So I'm going to do 2 backward knots on my final 2 pairs. We just did this whole entire pattern on your bracelet. Looks like that. And that's pretty much how you read these patterns. They're pretty easy. Just think of it like how you read. When we read left to right, we're reading forward. So if the arrow's going from left to right, it's a forward knot. And when we read backward, we read right to left. So if it's going from right to left, it's a backward knot. Some patterns you will have an odd number of strings. So this one we had 10 strings, so we had an even 5 pairs and then 4 pairs when these 2 outer strings were left out. But some of the patterns will have just an odd random number of string. This pattern has 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 strings. And when that happens, you just leave this string out like it says. So when it's kind of like that little spike there, that means you're leaving it out. If there's no circle over top of this string, then you do not do a knot with it. So for this bracelet, it kind of just alternates. So your first row, you have all these knots, and then this last string just kind of hanging out. And then the second row, you have all knots, but then this string's hanging out, if that makes sense. And for those of you asking, I get most of my patterns off of Google Images. You just type up like friendship bracelet pattern, cute, or strawberry, or whatever. Or you can go to friendshipbracelet.net or bracelet book or Pinterest as well. Alright, so that was my video for you guys. I'm actually going to link some of the patterns that you guys wanted. So the turtle bracelet, the bow one, and literally everybody has been asking about this bracelet. It was literally just a random pattern that I found and then screenshotted on my phone and then made and then deleted the picture. But I did some digging and I actually found the pattern, so I'm going to link this below as well if you want to make this bracelet. Thank you all for watching. I love you all and I will see you all later. Bye.